We are in the middle of a very busy day of exploring Santiago, Chile. We just got here this morning. We got right off the plane, changed in the airport bathroom into clothes for warm weather because it's summer here, it's winter back home, and then we went straight on our first walking tour, which lasted 4 or 5 hours.
Our guide Pablo led us on a very informative tour of Santiago, showing us government buildings and telling stories of the city's history.
Here we have the Mapocho River, who crossed the city of Santiago.
One of the highlights of the tour was trying mote con husillos, a traditional Chilean drink that's popular in the summertime. Later on, Vince and I stopped by Santa Lucia Hill to admire its beautiful architecture. We got dinner in the Bella Vista neighborhood, an area known for its artists and entertainers.
We've been all over the city at this point, and then we finally stopped back at the hotel, checked in. We are still going to go out later because we're only going to be in Santiago for a couple of days. We actually are going to get on a cruise ship in Valparaiso in a couple of days, which is going to stop at several stops around South America, and we're going to have 4 days of scenic cruising around the Antarctic Peninsula, which is kind of the main attraction of this whole trip. Just started unpacking, and I found this top secret envelope in my bag. I think one of my brothers, Caleb, snuck this into my bag when he drove us to the airport the other day. My birthday is actually coming up on this trip. It's going to be on the ship. I'm really tempted to open this now, but I'm going to be a good sister and I'm going to wait till my actual birthday.
We were traveling with a group of 20 friends, and about half of us decided to go back out for more sightseeing after we checked into our hotel.
We're taking a cable car up to the top of San Cristobal Hill. We should get a big panoramic view of the city and the mountains from up there. Jared loves cable cars.
So excited!
And we got Kathy and Rachel!
Yay! The view of Santiago from the top of San Cristobal Hill was unbeatable. We could see the whole city and the surrounding Andes mountain range. There's a 14-meter statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary at the hill's peak, and even though there were a lot of visitors taking in the views, everyone was being quiet and respectful of the religious site, making for a very peaceful experience. As I looked out over the towering mountain range, I couldn't help but anticipate what the next day would bring. Vince and I were planning to go into the mountains for some hiking, and I couldn't wait. Vince and I just drove from Santiago up into the mountains. We're at Parque Yerba Loca, and we are about to go on a hike. We're doing the German Refuge Trail, or Refugio Alemán. Yeah, we picked up a rental car this morning, and it is aggressively green. We already saw a tarantula just running across the road, so Vince quick pulled over, and we got a good look at it. We're hoping to get some good mountain views, and hopefully see some wildlife, but we'll see. So the name of the park is Yerba Loca, which means crazy weeds in English. I think we figured out why. There's so many cool plants on this trail. We're at a spot known as the Mirador del Condor. Apparently, sometimes you can see condors just soaring below us here. They don't seem to be out today. I found this neat looking bug, but I have no idea what it is, so if anyone out there can identify it, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. The refuge is up there. Yep, right about where my trekking pole is pointing. We got about 1 kilometer left to go. It felt great to be outside enjoying the sunshine on such a beautiful day. It was the middle of winter back home, and we hadn't seen the sun in what felt like weeks. The more elevation we gained, the better we could see Glacier La Paloma in the distance. When we finally arrived at the Refugio Alemán, we ate some snacks while we enjoyed the immense view of the valley below and the sprawling mountain range. It didn't take us long to hike back down to our car, and we drove back to Santiago, where we'd be staying one more night.
Well, we left Santiago this morning because we're boarding our cruise ship today. Right now we're in the city of Viña del Mar. We'll be in Valparaiso in just a little bit, and that's where we're going to board our cruise ship. But we are on a short walking tour right now.
This clock was given by a donation by the Embassy of Switzerland.
Next up, our bus brought us to the colorful coastal city of Valparaiso. Pablo led us on a funicular ride to the top of Cerro Alegre, or Happy Hill, where we could see out over the city. Of course, we couldn't pass up an opportunity to ride down a slide. The buildings of Cerro Alegre were covered in beautiful street art, and just like its name would suggest, we couldn't help but feel happy as we passed through the colorful neighborhood. Right now we're at the top of what's called Happy Hill. We rode a fun elevator up here, we got to go on a slide. Everything's covered in awesome street art, and there are artists all over the street, so definitely can tell why this is called Happy Hill. Also, behind me, we can see our ship, which is in port. It's actually kind of late today because there was a big swell this morning and they weren't able to come into the dock yet, so we'll be leaving a few hours late. At this point, I had no idea what was in store for us at boarding time. For now, we continued our walking tour, blissfully unaware of the situation that was materializing in port. Because our ship is so late, we got to come back to the beach at Viña del Mar. Viña del Mar is a popular vacation destination because of its beautiful sandy beaches. And we got a chance to enjoy the beach for a while and grabbed a lunch of arepas and empanadas. After lunch, we headed back to Valparaiso once again and started checking in for our cruise. That is when we realized that while we'd been out touring and having fun, the situation at port had quickly become chaotic. Finally starting the embarkation process, and it is a mess in here. There's so many people. They haven't finished disembarking yet from their last cruise. So basically what happened this morning is the swell was too high, so our ship wasn't actually able to come into port until hours later than they thought because the port authority wouldn't let them. And that's why all of this is happening right now. Do I have any good animal facts? Let me think. Off the top of my head, do you see that postcard over there? The top one is a gentoo penguin, and the next two are chinstrap penguins.
What's the difference, Frank Takiti?
They look different.
Fact.
That's very insightful.
They've started to pass out food. We're finally moving! After hours of waiting, we were all very enthusiastic to finally board the ship.
We're boarding! Yay!
Holy crap! We were actually among the lucky groups that got to board somewhat early. We heard later on that other people couldn't get aboard until late into the night. Well, we finally made it onto the ship. We're in our stateroom. Boy, the check-in process for this was outrageously horrible. I kind of get anxiety in crowds, and once they announced that they were going to start boarding, everybody just rushed up, packed in together. There was no PA system or anything, so you couldn't really hear what you were supposed to be doing. We finally get up. It took hours just standing in line after hours just waiting for the ship to be ready. They took all of our passports and just tossed them into bins. It didn't look very organized, so I guess that's a problem for another day. It is a really beautiful ship, and it feels really good to finally be on board. I actually feel pretty bad including any of this footage of the boarding process because this cruise was seriously outstanding. I don't want to give the impression that I was dissatisfied with it at all, but I'm leaving it in because it happened and it was part of our experience. It turned out that this was the Sapphire Princess's first time docking in Valparaiso. Normally they dock in San Antonio, which is better equipped to handle ships of this size. The passport thing also turned out fine. They had to take them because of regulations in some of our ports of call. That just wasn't explained to us at boarding with all of the chaos going on. So it was confusing and disconcerting to have our passports taken away with no real explanation. We did end up missing one port of call, Punta Arenas, because the ship was unable to refuel in Valparaiso, so we had to spend the next day in San Antonio fueling up. So we did a really cheap upgrade to get this obstructed ocean view room, but it also got us about 20 square feet of extra space. Honestly, I think that makes a really huge difference. It's not the biggest room in the world, but it definitely doesn't feel cramped, and we have a ton of storage space in here.
So we've got a nice big closet. We've unpacked everything. Another little closet with shelves. Then we've got this whole dresser with drawers that we can keep things in. And the bed has enough space underneath it for us to fit all of our luggage.
We attended a morning lecture with one of our ship's onboard naturalists. She had a lot of interesting information about Antarctica to share with us, which was great for building anticipation about our cruise.
And they come because the Southern Ocean churns up nutrients from the depths, which makes it one of the richest seas in the world.
Alright, so this is it. It is indeed my actual birthday. Dearest sister, forgive my inability to write in the proper form. Mother said it is because of this wretched lays upon me. I can imagine the smell of the fresh ocean breeze being most fine. Finer than the smell of mother's angst after hearing of my ribbing of your advanced age. I would compare the smell of that fresh air to the smell of living again under 30. Oh. With love, XOXO, brother Caleb. We've caught sight of why we're stuck here in San Antonio still. This is the ship that is currently filling up our ship with fuel.
Several of us met up for afternoon tea and then afterwards went up to the sports deck to play golf. When we got there, we realized that it was just a putting green with no obstacles, so we decided to make our own mini golf course out of whatever we had lying around. That evening, everyone met up for dinner, which ended with a round of the happy birthday song and cake.
Happy birthday, dear Kathleen. Happy birthday to you.
We're currently attending a penguin talk, and a lot of other people want to learn about penguins too.
They live mostly on the islands around the Antarctic. They have a stronghold on South Georgia, and they're particularly deep divers, coastal species, mostly hunting fish and squid in the deep parts of the sea.
Vince and I took our first jog/walk around the promenade deck. There was a decent swell that day, which made jogging simultaneously more treacherous and somehow more fun. After our workout, it felt great to jump into the pool, which it turned out was also simultaneously more treacherous and more fun.
This is what they mean by adventure cruise.
In the evening, we enjoyed a fantastic performance by violinist Doug Cameron, after which we headed outside onto Lido Deck, where we enjoyed the crisp, clear evening from the comfort of a hot tub.
We're having a customary percussive tours hot tub session. That's where we hog the entire hot tub, this time with football. Well, it's our third full day at sea, and I haven't really done much today because Vince has been working remotely, so I've just been kind of tinkering around the ship. I went to the buffet this morning, and then I went and read my book in the library for a little bit. I tried to go outside, but it was pelting rain. I couldn't even get the door open to get outside because the wind was so strong, and I looked out and the deck was completely covered in water anyways.
Even though I was having a relaxed day, everyone around the ship was gearing up for that evening's formal night.
It's our first formal night, so Vince and I are just getting dressed up, and we're gonna meet all of our friends downstairs for dinner. As if it wasn't hard enough to walk around this ship before, now I have to deal with wearing heels.
This was my first time cruising with Princess, so it was also my first time experiencing their champagne waterfall. Everyone was dressed up, and there was a band playing in the atrium as guests took turns pouring champagne onto the giant pyramid of glasses. It was a pretty fun spectacle, and it got us in the mood to dance. But first we had to attend the performance of Bravo, which was the ship's production show. Back in the atrium, we found a 3-floor party and danced the night away. That is, until I couldn't take being in my high heels anymore. We've sailed a bit inland today, so the seas are much calmer, which is a nice relief from just rocking around the ship all day. And we're also going to arrive in Ushuaia a bit early, which means we have some amazing scenery right now, just off the ship. I'm up here alone on the upper deck, and there's glaciers and mountains behind me. This is the first time I've ever owned 2 functioning camera bodies at the same time, so I brought them both on this trip. My new mirrorless camera on one side, and my old Rebel on the other side, so I can have a long lens and a short lens without having to change them out. The landscape in the Strait of Magellan was ruggedly beautiful, and I was so happy that we got the chance to see it. This was the day that we were supposed to be docked in Punta Arenas, where Vince and I had planned a shoreline hike along the strait, so it felt like a pretty good consolation prize that we got to sail through it, even if we didn't get to stop. Right now we're approaching the end of the world, the southernmost point in South America. We're sailing through some absolutely beautiful fjords, and for the past 30 minutes or so, we've been surrounded by whales. We got to see Cape Froward, which is the southernmost point on South America's mainland. The group got together for a ping pong and foosball tournament on the sports deck. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the opening ceremonies of the Percussive Tours Olympics.
I'm the one at Key Point. Look at these sweet points.
Jared showing off. Yeah. He's only got 1 point. And over here at the Elite Ping Pong Championships. But I couldn't stay inside for long with so much beautiful scenery passing by, so I went outside and spent the rest of the day on the ship's bow. We've finally made port in Ushuaia. It's a beautiful, peaceful morning here, although it is supposed to get rainy and windy later today. There's not a lot of people up on the deck yet. I'm going to find Vince. Right now I'm feeling really good. We're going to set foot on land today. Even before we disembarked from the ship, we got to take in a stunning view of Ushuaia and the surrounding mountains. This land is known as Tierra del Fuego, or Land of Fire, and also Fin del Mundo, or End of the World. We have like 4 extra hours in port today, so Vince and I just hopped on board a 3-hour boat tour that will, fingers crossed, hopefully be back in time for our other tour to Tierra del Fuego this afternoon. I had been so excited to set foot on land, and the irony wasn't lost on me that we'd immediately hopped on yet another boat half an hour after disembarking from the ship. But with the amazing panoramic views of the Beagle Channel surrounding us, it was pretty hard to regret our choices. We stopped at this beautiful island for a short walk. From the island, we could see mountains in every direction, and the land was covered in a diverse and beautiful range of hardy plants. Back on the boat, we sped off towards our next destination, Isla de los Pájaros, aptly named for the cormorant colony that lives on top of it. At first glance, all I noticed on the island was a blanket of black and white imperial cormorants, which are an awesome spectacle by themselves, but upon closer inspection, I began to find other animals. Sea lions and other types of shorebird mingled among the cormorants, and to my great surprise, an Andean condor soared above the island for a few brief moments. Next up, we got to visit a small island with a lighthouse on top of it, and Isla de los Lobos, named for the seals that bask on its jagged rocks. After Isla de los Lobos, it was time to head back to Ushuaia, where we were able to meet up with our group for our next tour with plenty of time to spare. We're spending our afternoon in Tierra del Fuego. It's really beautiful, but the weather is a bit grim. It changes every 5 or 10 minutes around here, so you never know what's coming next. Even though it was rainy, it felt great to be outside, seeing the rugged landscape of Tierra del Fuego National Park. It's hard to let a light rain get you down when you have lakes and mountains and forests to explore. Our guide was very knowledgeable about local wildlife, and I asked him a barrage of questions about various birds that we saw throughout the day. Our last stop of the tour was to the southernmost point on the Pan American Highway. The wheels in my brain started turning with ideas about taking a road trip from Alaska all the way back down to Ushuaia someday, but that trip will probably have to wait until retirement since it would take several months to complete. Part of me wanted to stay in Ushuaia instead of getting back on the ship, but at least we had Richard's birthday to celebrate that evening.
Richard!
Happy birthday, dear Richard! Happy birthday to you!
So we're back on board the ship today, and today is the day that we actually go through the Drake Passage, which is notoriously rough seas. Our captain told us last night that we should be seeing swells of about 20 feet at some point today. So far, not so much. It's actually been smoother sailing than a few days ago on formal night when we were all stumbling around the ship. After we get through the Drake Passage, we're going to be in Antarctica, which is absolutely crazy. I can't believe that I'm actually doing this, and I'm so excited. This is the Drake Passage so far. This is actually the waviest we've seen it all day, so not very wavy at all. Apparently we're out running a storm at the moment, so if that does catch up to us, we will be in for some choppy waters later today. But right now, it is more like the Drake Lake. Without much on the agenda for the day, we joined Jared in the casino for a bit of roulette. You ready to lose some money?
I'm ready to lose.
I eat my words. He won $10.
$9 now. 10 whole dollars.
It's about 6 o'clock in the morning on our first day in Antarctica. Right now we're approaching Elephant Island, which will be the first land we see from Antarctica. Of course, right now we've got pretty dense fog hanging over the horizon. We're about 10 miles out from Elephant Island right now. On a clear day, we should be able to see it when we're about 5 miles out from this height. Even without any land in sight, there was still plenty to see from our position on the ship's bow. If you wanted to see a whale, all you had to do was wait a few minutes. Chinstrap penguins would occasionally porpoise through the waves, and Braden became the group expert at spotting seals. So we've spent the morning with some really dense fog, but it's still been worth it to be up on deck because we've been seeing chinstrap penguins all morning and we've seen several fin whales so far. The fog just lifted a little bit and we have our first view of Elephant Island. Now, this is where Shackleton's men spent 4 months waiting for rescue. Vince, Jared, and I spent the afternoon in the hot tub as our captain set a course for King George Island and Admiralty Bay. We're just now sailing into Admiralty Bay. We can see a few bases out on the shoreline, some ships that looked super tiny compared to the ice. Now we had a real sense of the immensity of the Antarctic landscape. Blue glaciers surrounded us, and the research bases lent a sense of scale to the towering ice. King George Island is one of the South Shetland Islands, and Admiralty Bay is notable as the best anchorage in the South Shetlands because it's protected on so many sides. It's also an important nesting area for many bird species, including 3 species of penguin. In fact, we saw some penguin colonies along the rocky shorelines, but they were so far away that they looked like pebbles scattered along the beach. It was impossible to even identify the species from our vantage point, although they could have been Gentoo, chinstrap, or Adelie penguins, as all 3 of these have known colonies in the bay. Dusk was falling as we headed back out to sea, although full darkness would never set in since we were visiting in the Antarctic summer. Just behind me is our first view of the Antarctic mainland. This morning we've been seeing gorgeous blue glaciers floating past, and today we're going to go into a couple of bays which are supposed to be absolutely beautiful. Wow, we just saw a group of humpback whales feeding on krill. That's the base of the ecosystem around here. The whales eat it, they come up from the water, and they scoop a bunch of water into their mouths, and then they sloosh it back out through their baleen, and what's left is the krill. We even saw one of them breach, meaning it jumped out of the water. I got some really terrible pictures. If I don't get anything better, I will include those pictures in the video. The entrance to Charlotte Bay was guarded by quintessential blue icebergs, which were too numerous to allow the ship to pass through. But we did get a good look at the ice for a while, as a pod of humpback whales put on a great show for us. Since we were unable to enter Charlotte Bay, the captain made the decision to visit Wilhelmina Bay instead, and within a couple of hours we were sailing between fast-moving icebergs that looked as though they'd been intentionally sculpted into fantastic shapes. Wilhelmina Bay is often referred to as Whalemina Bay because it's one of the best places in the Antarctic to spot whales. During the whaling period of Antarctic exploration, whalers described such an abundance of whales that one could walk across the entire bay on the backs of humpbacks. Of course, like so many stories, the whaling industry hunted these gentle creatures to the brink of extinction before protections were placed on them starting in the 1960s. Now the whales are starting to make a comeback. Notably, a group of somewhere around 1,000 fin whales was recently observed near Coronation Bay, a sight that hasn't been witnessed in decades. While there definitely weren't thousands of whales in Wilhelmina Bay while we were there, we only had to wait a few seconds between seeing humpbacks surface. On our way back out of the bay, we passed by several icebergs containing a mixture of gentoo and chinstrap penguin hitchhikers. Icebergs provide a relatively safe place for penguins to rest while they're out hunting. They spend a lot of time porpoising through the water hunting krill, and the contrast between their grace in the water and their awkward waddle on the ice was kind of hilarious. These are birds that are particularly well adapted for swimming, and their power and grace is unmatched. That is, until they're faced with a solid surface on which to walk. Wow, this has already been one of just the most incredibly special days of my life. And I think we still have 2 bays that we're going to try to go into yet today. It's so shocking how much life there is here in Antarctica. It's a frozen wasteland, so you wouldn't think that anything can survive out here, but there's animals everywhere. Penguins, whales, lots of different kinds of bird species, and of course the krill is the base of it all. It's the base of the food chain here. It supports all of the other life. We sailed through the Gerlache Strait towards the Neumayer Channel. Along the way, we saw a spectacular display of humpback whales breaching. Every 5 to 10 seconds, a whale would leap out of the water, landing with a massive splash. Some birders that we'd met at our regular hangout on the bow on Deck 8 also spotted a very distant pod of orcas, and I managed to get a 3-pixel picture of them. While navigating through the Neumayer Channel, we saw a landscape that looked as though it had been desaturated. Jagged mountain peaks rose from the sea, shrouded in low-hanging clouds, and everything was in stark shades of black and white, save for the occasional blue ice that served as a reminder that we hadn't in fact stepped into a black and white film. As the day grew later, the temperatures started to drop, and we had to resort to silly dancing to stay warm. After dinner, Vince and I were the only ones willing to brave the hot tub as a harsh wind had developed, a precursor to a coming storm. So this morning, our captain made an announcement that everything we were going to do today has pretty much been canceled due to some bad weather. There's been a storm rolling through, and he's trying to just kind of wait it out before we cross the Drake Passage again. So earlier today, we got together with some folks from the percussive group, and we played some games.
What is this? Rabbit.
Keep going. Puke.
Puke.
I have been working on an embroidery project that I brought with me, and we are about to get together with, I think, most, if not all, of our group of 20 to play a big group game up in the Skywalker's nightclub.
Swimming. Wow.
You put bread in it, it makes it brown and crispy.
In blatant violation of the Antarctic Treaty, Vince and I had a bitter snowball fight on Lido Deck. In the evening, we attended a show by magician Gaston Quieto. We always sat in row 2 when we went to the performances, so it wasn't a huge surprise when Vince got picked out of the audience to participate in the show.
Right here. Let's see what card you just stopped by. You stopped by, 9 of diamonds is a nice card, 9 of diamonds. Now watch. What I want you to do is write your signature there. The 9 of diamonds, big letters. Very good. So, that's it. We're going to cover it. Hold it for a minute because we're going to use it later on. So 9 of diamonds. Watch this. I'm going to take the 9, okay? And I'm going to fold it. This. And like that. And now I'm going to use another, have the marker. The 4. Now watch, I'm gonna just go here and place my initials. Fourth page, the Argentine. And we need to touch also the index finger. This is crazy. The index finger, the index, like this. 1, 2. It's done. One card, ladies and gentlemen, in my mouth, and that is the 9 of diamonds with your signature. Look at the 9. Is that your signature? Is it? That's a signature. Check yours. Unfold it and tell me that is, ladies and gentlemen. Look at that. Forest page with my signature, is it? Oh my God, that's great, that's great.
This is going to be our last view of Antarctica right here. We're back at Elephant Island, and today it's actually visible, and it is so much bigger than I realized it was the other day when we just got that tiny glimpse of it in the fog.
I was so happy that the weather cleared up enough to allow us some time at Elephant Island before we sailed back across the Drake. In fact, the morning even gave us glimpses of sunlight through the clouds, which cast spectacular light onto the island's glistening blue glaciers. When we left Elephant Island, we were officially leaving Antarctica, which filled me with mixed feelings of sadness to be leaving and extreme gratitude to have been there at all. I've dreamt of going to Antarctica for decades at this point, and have tossed around the fantasy of finding a job at an Antarctic base more times than I can count. I find ice incredibly enchanting. It's amazing to me how a place that's so inhospitable and unforgiving can be so intoxicatingly beautiful. It's my deep hope that someday I can return to Antarctica and actually set foot on land there, but whether I ever do or not, I will always cherish these memories of the time I spent at the bottom of the world.
Well, today is another full day at sea. To be honest, this cruise involves a lot of spending time just at sea on the boat. I actually got sick of it kind of less fast than I imagined I would. There's a lot to do on this boat, but after about a week and a half of it, it's all starting to feel kind of samey. I guess, like, when I think about it, I just imagined up until very, very recently, this was not a possibility for people to do. Like, it's amazing. We've got a floating city basically taking us down to Antarctica. Antarctic explorers were in, like, the hull of a wooden boat for months and months and months with nothing to do, barely any light. When you think about that, you start to think, yeah, a handful of sea days in a row really isn't that bad, is it? It's worth it. So yeah, we're just a little more relaxed right now. We've just been wandering, talking to people, getting to know our trip mates a bit better. Tomorrow is going to be one of the most exciting days of the trip for me. We're going to Stanley in the Falkland Islands. Vince and I booked this excursion to go to Volunteer Point, which is where there is a large king penguin colony, and it is breeding season, so I'm assuming we're going to see a lot of chicks. King penguins are the second biggest penguin on Earth, and they do look superficially similar to emperor penguins. Emperor penguins are ice obligate species. They only live, like, really far south. King penguins, obviously, can go further north. We cannot wait to get off this boat and go see some penguins.
The Sapphire Princess made port in Stanley, East Falkland early in the morning, and Vince and I were on one of the first tenders to shore since we'd booked one of Princess's official tours. Once on land, we met our guide John, who drove us on a 2-hour adventure to reach Volunteer Point. Along the way, we asked him a lot of questions about what it's like to live in such a remote place, and honestly, it sounded pretty appealing, with the exception of their terrible internet coverage. The off-roading portion of the journey was a lot of fun and made the tour feel a lot more adventurous. We knew we were getting close to Volunteer Point when we saw our first glimpse of the ocean. My heart started racing with adrenaline as we pulled into a grassy car park and John let us loose to explore the penguin colonies. It was hard to even decide where to start once we got to Volunteer Point because there were penguins in every direction we looked. We encountered some Magellanic burrows complete with chicks on our way to the main attraction, the King Penguin Huddle. Between its Magellanic, Gentoo, and King Penguin colonies, Volunteer Point is home to around 2,000 penguins. The King Penguin Huddle was where most of the action was. King penguins have the longest breeding cycle of any species of penguin, which lasts 14 to 16 months, and females will lay eggs over a period that spans from November to April. Because of this prolonged breeding period, we were able to see chicks in various stages of development, from unhatched all the way up to recently molted. Young chicks are gray, but as they grow, their feathers become brown and fluffy as they near readiness to molt into their swimming feathers. After molting, the juveniles look much more similar to their parents, but the distinctive coloration of their necks is still a pale yellow in contrast to the deep orange of the mature adults. We took a break from the huddle to check out the beach, stopping to look at a two-banded plover along the way. We have to be really careful while we're walking on these sandy bits because the Magellanic penguins are burrowing nesters, so there are just holes everywhere. You could fall into a nest if you're not careful. Much to our delight, there were smaller groups of penguins on the beach, and we even got to see a couple of groups meet up with each other from opposite ends of the beach. It's outrageously hard to keep from anthropomorphizing penguins. I mean, they walk upright and look like they're dressed for a red carpet event. So can I really be blamed for imagining them talking to each other in posh accents about where they get their suits tailored? We found a Gentoo colony too, so now we've seen King penguins, Magellanic penguins, and Gentoo penguins. And you can tell them apart because of the different coloring on their face. These Gentoo parents were vigilantly protecting their chicks from vultures and shorebirds that were soaring overhead, looking for any opportunity to snatch an unsuspecting chick. This served as a reminder that although we'd ridden here in a comfortable 4x4 and were having a lovely day, this was truly a wild place, and the animals here lived in a constant struggle for survival. With the remainder of our time, we returned to the King Penguin Huddle to make some closer observations of their behavior. They would stick their necks up above the crowd when they waddled through, and nearby penguins snapped at any passersby. The windy atmosphere was filled with their strange honking calls that seemed closer to the sound of a squeaky toy than a living animal. We also got to watch a couple of chicks eating regurgitated food out of their parents' bills. All too soon, it was time to drive back to Stanley, where we had time to visit a couple of gift shops before boarding the ship. After Stanley, our whole group got together to celebrate our various travel milestones. For me and Vince, Antarctica marked our 7th continent, and by the end of the trip, our country count was up to 39.
Some people are celebrating hitting a certain country count or continent count or just trip count or any celebration. We have anniversaries and birthdays, and this is kind of just a general celebration of whatever you like. That's amazing.
7 continents.
Yes.
Woohoo!
Planets who's been to Earth.
Oh yeah.
More than Earth.
Yeah.
Our last full day at sea started with a crew appreciation event. I can't say enough positive things about the crew of the Sapphire Princess. They did an absolutely commendable job from start to finish.
Well, today is our last full day at sea aboard the Sapphire Princess. It's kind of weird to think about that because we've been on this ship for so long that it's starting to feel like we live here. And now we're gonna have to get off and go to our actual home, which I am starting to miss home, so it's good, it's sad at the same time. Yeah, we got on the ship on January 20th, and it's now February 3rd, and we officially disembark on the 5th. So tomorrow we will be in Montevideo, Uruguay, but today we're just enjoying our last day at sea.
We were far enough north now that the weather was nice enough for a swim in the outdoor pool. And we set a new Percussive Tours record by fitting 11 of us into a hot tub that was really only meant to hold maybe 5 people.
We made it to sunny Montevideo, Uruguay.
Jared had booked us a walking tour for our day in Montevideo. We started at Zabala Square, where we saw a statue dedicated to the city's founder. There were also monk parakeets chirping loudly in the trees. The cold weather was behind us, and now we enjoyed sunshine and palm trees as we toured Uruguay's capital city. We visited the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception and Constitution Square. Then we learned about mate, an herbal drink that seems to be even more popular in South America than coffee is here in the US.
This is our typical cha, and we drink with hot water.
Next, we went to Independence Square, where we saw Palacio Salvo, got a quick tango lesson, and then went into the mausoleum of José Gervasio Artigas, the national hero of Uruguay. After our tour, we had time to walk around on our own, shop, and try different foods. I don't eat meat, but the smell of cooking meat was ever present throughout the city. Combined with the sea breeze, this made the air smell amazing. In fact, it might be the best smelling city I've ever visited. We even got a chance to try mate.
First mate.
What's it taste like?
Strong and leafy.
We walked back to the ship where our captain had some poignant parting words for us.
Like any Antarctic adventure, it was a battle against the elements, somehow appropriate for the privilege of seeing what so few have ever seen before. By the end, we managed a magnificent morning at the bottom of Wilhelmina Bay and Plata Passage, picked our way carefully through the inverted S-bend at Newmare Channel, saw scores of whales, visited Admiralty Bay and Elephant Island, and so much more. We hope you will cherish these memories for years to come. In closing, and in the spirit of our Antarctic adventure, if you would be kind enough to indulge me, I leave you with one last Ernest Shackleton quote. The only true failure would be not to explore at all.
Well, we said goodbye to the Sapphire Princess this morning. Vince and I grabbed a taxi outside of the cruise port, came to the airport, and we're going to go to Iguazu Falls for a couple of days to see one of the biggest waterfalls in the world. We made it to Iguazu. Basically, it's like we're on an entirely different vacation because now we're in the tropics and it couldn't be more dissimilar from Antarctica. So hot and humid here. It's amazing. Vince and I really don't have any major plans for today, which is good because it's Sunday and not much seems to be opened anyway. We are just walking down to the local artisan market. We are also going to go to the point of the river where you can see 3 countries at once. So we'll be able to get a viewpoint of Argentina, which is where we are now, but also Brazil and Paraguay.
The walk down to the riverfront was lovely. It felt amazing to be in the rainforest and to have the freedom to roam around on our own schedule after so much time aboard the ship.
We can see Brazil from here. There's Paraguay. There's Brazil. There's Argentina.
After visiting the viewpoint at Las Tres Fronteras, we hopped onto a boat tour that would visit all 3 countries' borders. We started out in the Iguazu River and saw a small waterfall before turning in the direction of the Parana River. I even took a turn driving the boat.
Ranger Katie, where are you taking us?
We made it to the border between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay just as the sun was setting, and then returned to shore where Vince and I checked out the local market before grabbing some dinner. Vince and I crossed the border into Brazil this morning. We're going to visit the falls later, but right now we're at the bird park. We came here first because the birds are more active in the morning. I was ecstatic when a couple of wild toucans swooped down from the treetops and perched nearby. I've only ever seen them in flight and from a distance, and seeing them up close was a completely different experience. Toucans aside, the park had a lot of really amazing animals, including some rare species, like a pair of curassows, which are extinct in the wild. My favorite enclosures by far were the parrot aviary and the macaw nursery. In the parrot enclosure, we bought seed sticks so we could feed the birds. There were 13 different types of parrot, and I had a lot of fun trying to spot as many of them as I could. The macaw nursery was equally exciting, especially when the birds took flight, soaring the length of the aviary. There was also a butterfly house that showcased some of the butterflies that we would soon see fluttering through the forest. Before we knew it, we were headed through the jungle towards the day's next adventure. We are going to take the boat underneath the waterfalls. Our guide Nada promised that we would get 110% wet. Many of our friends that we were traveling with have been to Iguazu Falls before, and they were all adamant that we go on the Under the Falls boat tour while we were here. The ride was a lot of fun even before we came anywhere near the falls. We went over some rapids, which was exciting, and stopped for a look at a huge section of falls along the way. Vince and I would be standing on top of these falls the next day at the Argentine side. Before long, we were approaching the Brazilian falls, ready to be pummeled by water. I don't know why I thought wearing my raincoat was going to help me at all. I was completely drenched after just a couple of passes under the waterfall. But that's okay because it was so much fun, and the water felt super refreshing on a hot day. By the time we turned back toward the dock, the boat was totally flooded. On the return trip, we saw a family of capybaras. These are the largest rodent species still alive today. I would have loved to have a camera other than my GoPro on hand, but I already drowned one camera in Victoria Falls a few years ago, and I wasn't looking for a repeat of that experience. Well, we just got back from the boat tour, and we did get 110% wet. It was very fun, and now we're doing the trail around the falls. The 275 cascades of Iguazu Falls make up the largest broken waterfall in the world. Even when we were still miles away from the falls, we could see a cloud of mist rising above the jungle created by the massive amounts of falling water. Finally seeing it up close was even more impressive. We encountered a group of adorable South American coatis along the way. Coatis are members of the raccoon family, and in this instance, they were very interested in trying to get food from passing tourists. This is highly discouraged by the park authorities. Human food can have negative impacts on their health, and there's also a risk of being bitten or scratched by a coati. I didn't have any food to offer them even if I had wanted to, but that didn't stop them from checking me out while I was photographing them. Eventually, Vince was able to persuade me to leave the coatis and get back on the trail, and we quickly reached the main attraction. The circuit ends with a boardwalk that juts out into the river, culminating in a platform where visitors are surrounded by waterfalls on 3 sides. There was water everywhere, cascading from the cliff tops and flowing underneath the boardwalk. This was the best place to appreciate the different tiers of the waterfall and to spot rainbows in the mist. After we left the park, our guide drove us back to the border where we crossed back into Argentina. It was still late afternoon, so we still had plenty of time to stop at one more local wildlife attraction. Some of the birders we met on the cruise gave us a tip to come here. Jardín de los Picaflores. So we came and there are so many hummingbirds. You just sit here in the garden and they just fly around. There's hundreds of them. And we actually ended up running into a few of the birders while we were here. So that was crazy to see some people from the ship again. Jardín de los Picaflores was such a relaxing place to spend our evening after a long day of activity. It really was the perfect conclusion to an amazing day. This is our last day in Puerto Iguazu, and we are at the Argentinian side of Iguazu Falls today. We only had a half day to spend at the falls, and a lot of ground to cover, so we didn't waste any time in finding the Lower Falls trailhead. The trail was beautiful, and we felt much more immersed in the rainforest on this side of the park. We also got a very different view of the same waterfalls we'd seen the day before. Tegu lizards were a common sight alongside the trail. We'd arrived at the park early enough that the Lower Falls Trail wasn't very crowded yet, and we enjoyed seeing smaller waterfalls and more rainbows as ever-present butterflies fluttered through the forest. Of course, we also saw our fair share of coatis foraging on the forest floor. When we got to the Upper Falls Trail, we ran into a major traffic jam. January and February are typically the busiest time of year at the falls, so it was unsurprising that we ran into a backup like this. In fact, I was more surprised that the Brazil side hadn't been this busy as well. We still enjoyed the trail, waiting in line when we had to, in between getting our turn at several viewpoints along the way. The neat thing about the Argentine park is that you get to stand on platforms directly on top of the waterfalls and watch the rapids tumbling over the cliff edge right below your feet. The upper trail is made entirely of boardwalks that span across the river, and the rainforest still grows wherever there's exposed land, creating little islands of green vegetation surrounded by rushing water. I really love this trail despite the overcrowding. It helped give some perspective about how incredibly wide the river is at the top of the falls, and it was just a very unique environment. The upper circuit took much longer than we'd expected because of the crowds, and by the time we finished it, we were pretty hungry, so we sat down for a quick lunch at the park's cafe. Little blue butterflies kept landing on my left knee. Butterflies are attracted to sweat, but I'm not exactly sure how or why just one of my knees was the prime location to find it. See how small these are? We rode the train out to see Devil's Throat, the most famous waterfall at the park. But it turned out that the trail was closed for repairs, so we regrouped and hiked part of the way along the Macuco Trail instead. We didn't have time to make it all the way to the waterfall at the end, but we did see some huge ants, a lot of unique butterflies, and an agouti. All too soon, it was time to head to the airport and board our flight back to Buenos Aires.
This feels really crazy to say, but it is the last day of our trip. Vince and I traveled from Puerto Iguazu to Buenos Aires last night. We do have a few hours that we can spend exploring the city before we have to leave to get on our flight home. We've been gone for almost a month, and it feels crazy to be going home, but honestly, it feels pretty good. We're excited to see our families, we're excited to see our cat.
About half of the group walked over to the Plaza del Congreso together, where we saw a beautiful fountain and admired the outside of the Palace of the Argentine National Congress. Then Vince, Braden, and I took a taxi over to La Boca neighborhood, where we did some window shopping in its colorful buildings and then had lunch. Later, we met back up with everyone else for a tour of Teatro Colón, which is considered to be one of the most beautiful opera houses in the world. That evening, we started our journey home. After such a lengthy and epic trip, it felt a bit surreal to be headed back to our normal lives. We had traveled from the arid Andes Mountains, through Patagonia, down to the bottom of the world at the Antarctic Peninsula, and finally landed in a tropical rainforest. In just 3 weeks, we'd seen so many different ecosystems on 2 continents, amazing wildlife, and vibrant cities. This was definitely the trip of a lifetime.
I think a condor pooped all over this picture of a condor. Later today, we're going to be heading to Valparaiso, which is where we're going to board our cruise ship. Vince just took a selfie of us.
We're supposed to stop.
So we're gonna be saying goodbye to the Santiago area today. Here comes Jared.
Oh, that wasn't even a selfie. Selfie fail.
He
There
just
we
took
go.
a picture of Rachel. All right, everybody's trying to mess me up today. I wasn't filming. Oh, are you serious? Okay, just go shoot the ball.
Everybody, all eyes over here. All eyes over here.